And welcome back everybody. So this next lesson I'm going to start focusing on laying out the UVs first, and then I will target the actual sculpting in the next lesson. And like I mentioned in the previous video, go through all the steps until the end, until we have the final portfolio piece. Right, so I feel like we have a few things that I would like to address how I built those. Like this prop over here is a duplicate of the previous one. It's very similar to the same crate I had, just designed in a slightly different way. Again, it's a repetition of most of the same techniques. It's kind of like a plank that's duplicated a few times, subdivisions across, tweaking some of the shapes. I don't personally think that it's necessary to go through the whole making of this piece, as it's quite simple and very primitive and easy to make yourself. I will put this guy off to the side as I feel like it's just like an extra piece. I've added a little fence over here with some grass blades, and those are again very simple primitives. The grass blades are just, let's grab these over here, basically like a two-sided plane split in half and then curved and bend across to kind of create that shape. And then having to use something like the soft selection with B, click and drag, we can then go and move these guys around until we're happy with what it looks like. Let's make this nice and big. That looks better. And maybe make this one a little bit shorter. Rotate the guy around to make it look like it's kind of bent and buckled. And then we also need to rotate it this way around. Pull this across, making sure that we don't bend it and push it too far in its actual shape. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is literally a very small piece to the design and is really not adding too much dimension to the scene. What I've done next is on these objects, like the bucket over here and this little pot thing right next to it, I would say these edge loops going across along the ring loop, we need to make sure that these are softened. Now I've already pre-softened these. I want to show you guys what it looks like when it is not softened at all. I'm going to harden all edges. And what this gives us is these super sharp edges going around the model. And visually it kind of immediately gives you the impression that this is a low poly model. And the idea of softening the edges is to kind of fake the illusion of a more rounded surface without adding physical subdivisions. So if I double click on one of these loops, it's going to loop select the whole loop all the way around this particular edge. And then what I'm going to do is going to convert this into a ring. So edge loop and edge ring utilities, and then to edge ring, and that automatically converts the selection for us. And then what I'm going to do is simply just go to mesh display and say soften, and that does the work that I need. So I've already done it to this one, I've already done it to the pots, I've already worked on the rocks or the stones, and everything. Like over here we can see these are not softened. Those are nice and soft, but then the borders of the original polygon surface is still sharp. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick shortcut method, holding down shift and right clicking, the marking menu will pop up, and then we can go to soften edges and then soften edges again. And that goes for all the objects you would like to do it. If that tool was the last tool you used, you can hit G, which is the last tool or command that we've applied, and that will very quickly repeat that process on all of those objects. Now if they start getting too dark, it simply means that there's not enough edges to make that 90-degree edge between these two faces blend easily, so it's having a very difficult time to try and round out the visualization of it. And for that case, we might want to just simply sharpen the bottom edges, and that should fix the problem. But for now, I'll leave it like that. All the other areas around the model, let's have a look. For the most part, I'm very happy with what we've achieved so far. I think we can now start looking at creating the UVs. So let's jump in and focus on the creation of the UVs for one of these planks, as these are quite simple to make, and I'll quickly run through my simple process of setting up the UVs. First of all, let's save, and then in the UV editor we can see that the basic primitive that was created still has its old T-shape UV template, so we can just go ahead under the UV editor, go polygons, and then say delete UVs. That will get rid of it, and then we can start laying out this from scratch. So first of all, we need to actually planar map this into the UV editor, and then from there we can choose where we want the seams and then cut them up and lay them out. So under the UV editor we can see there's our different mapping methods: cylindrical, planar, and spherical. For the most part, I'll probably be using this one. And if I click that, that will go ahead and do a top-down projection along the y-axis, and it gives us a little gizmo tool to move around. And then in the UV editor you can definitely see that we have the UVs laid out. So we can, if we really want to, orbit and rotate this plank or the projection for the UVs to match the angle of the actual plank, but it doesn't really matter too much, as we can do the same stuff inside of the UV editor anyways. So I need to lay out some particular UV seams, and then from there we can unfold it inside the UV editor. So first of all, it's easier to do stuff inside of 3D space than trying to find the same corresponding edges in the UV editor, especially that this object is plane mapped from the top, so it's projecting the UVs right through the model. So the seams on the side will be stretched, but the top and the bottom will not be stretched. We can preview that by toggling on the texture grid display. You can see over here we have some stretching. Over here it seems fine, and then at the bottom, if we isolate this guy, you can see that's also more or less good enough. So we need to fix the seams and the UV stretching on the sides. So it's quite simple, very easy, not too difficult. I'm going to choose a very quick edge loop around here. I'm choosing an edge loop that runs along the length of the model, and then I'm also going to cut along the vertical, the horizontal axes, like that. And what this will do for us is allow the model to open up along those seams, and if we give it enough seams, this model will unfold very nice and easy. So once we have those edges selected, all we have to do in here is go to polygons, and then we can say cut UV edges. A shortcut to get to the same menu is inside of the marking menu. So if you hold down shift, you can right click and you can see there's a cut UVs tool, and then move and sew, which we will be using soon. So once you've added the cut, we can preview the cut, or the cut or border edges as they call it. You can have access to that through this button over here, and thickening up the edges. And then from there, all we have to do is select the UV shell selection tool. If we click on that, it selects the whole UV panel, and then we can do a simple unfold. Now, if you open up the unfold options, you will see that mine is currently set to method unfold 3D. And for you to have that, you need to make sure you have the Unfold 3D plugin active inside of your plugins manager. So if you scroll down, we can find the Unfold 3D plugin over there. So once we have that, I'm just simply going to say apply, and that will go ahead and unwrap this model for us. Some of the edges are still a bit skew, and that's because of the tension line happening between these UV seams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some extra edges. So I'm going to go out of the UV selection or UV shell selection tool, just by pressing W to go to a different tool, and then go back to edges, select the edges that I want to cut, like over there for instance, and you can repeat the same process on the opposite side. And then I'm going to do shift right click cut, and the quick way to access the unfold tool from here is simply by selecting the UV shell, shift right click and say unfold, and that will cut it up for us. So that looks pretty good. I'm happy with the unfold. There, some of the edges are skewing, and it's most likely because of this UV panel over here. But I'm not too concerned, as this is mostly going to be painted in a 3D space instead of a 2D space. If it was an issue where you wanted to have everything perfectly parallel to each other or perpendicular, then you might want to go in here and then manually just tweak some of these points. Excellent. That was quick, very simple unfold, and it works for the most part even if you're doing characters. As long as you do have enough seams going along certain parts of the model, especially parts where it's very compressed, then you can relieve some of those tension lines just by adding extra cuts, and that will then unfold quite nice and easy, and that will definitely make a good looking UV layout. So the first plank is laid out. This is definitely the quickest way of doing it. If you do the traditional side projection and then top projection and bottom projection, that's going to take way much longer. So it's better to use this technique. So you can repeat the same process through all of these, but I don't personally think it's necessary for you guys to watch this as I'm doing all of them. You've got enough knowledge now from this particular piece that I've done here to then repeat that to most of these planks. So I'm going to run through them, and once I'm done with that, I will get back to you guys. Okay, so I spent some time working on these planks because they are all following more or less the same workflow that I've showed in the previous section. And so basically what I've done here is just applied a simple checker texture to the objects that is done. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it allows me to see which object still needs UVs and which ones I have completed. So to do this, I'm going to show you guys from scratch how to apply that to an object. If I have a simple cube of sorts, let's bring this into view, and I'm just going to quickly increase the width, the height and the depth. And so you can select the object of your choice. If you right click on it and you go to assign new material, you can then go assign something like a Lambert, and then inside the Lambert, under the attribute editor, you'll see under the color slot there's a little checker box. So I'm going to click on that, and then I will go to the checker texture. Now that I've applied it, I have the texture that I can then go ahead and preview by hitting 6 on the keyboard. So just keep in mind, if you're in flat shaded mode, which is 5 key on the keyboard, then you will not see the texture even though it is assigned to the shader that is assigned to the object. As soon as you press 6, it will then go ahead and preview that texture for you. Excellent. Now that you have created that material, then you can just go ahead, select any object of your choice that you want to reassign that shader. You can then right click, go to assign existing material, and then choose the material that you have created. And in that way, it will go ahead and apply it. Now, in this case, even though I have assigned the Lambert to this object and the texture preview is on, you cannot see the texture being displayed on this model because this object does not have any form of UVs. If we have a look here, we have no UVs. We do have the texture preview. I can toggle that on and off through this little image viewer, but there's no UVs of any sort. So what I'm going to do is, again, very quickly just use the planar map. Under the options, I'm going to choose the Y axis as my projection angle, and then now you will see the UVs as well as the texture. I'm going to go ahead and select all the UVs just by right clicking UV mode and then selecting all the UV components, and then I'm just going to hit unfold and then layout. That way we're stacking the UVs in that UV space, stretching it out to fit the borders, and it's laid out and we have very nice and clean grid lines. And this process can be repeated as many times as you like. So I'm going to run through the same process. This one, I'm going to isolate that, and what I'm going to do is actually look at the angle that I want to project it, and instead of using, let's say, the planar map, I can use the camera based projection, which is also pretty useful and very easy to use. You can see it's nicely laid out. Again, let's quickly assign that shader, right click. I'm going to go to the assign existing material Lambert, and then we have the texture assigned. Always make sure looking at it from different angles that there is no distortion or weirdness happening, and this one looks pretty good. Very happy with the results. Gonna unisolate that and then work on some of the other assets. Let's jump to one of these cylindrical shapes. I'm going to isolate that and just show you guys my method or my workflow to doing the UV map for it. It's a very you can either use your cylinder, but I would still go and use the planar because it's a lot simpler and easy to lay out. So let's do a top-down kind of projection using camera based, and all I'm going to do is loop select along the borders of the cylinder. I'm going to cut those areas, assign or enable the border texture display, and then one single loop going right through the center of this guy. Make sure we don't add any extra edges, and then I'm going to shift right click cut, and then I'm going to convert to UVs, and then I'm just going to say unfold and layout. And if we turn on texture preview display, we can see that we have very good looking UVs. We do have a bit of a compression happening here as the shape is kind of narrowing down, and you can kind of straighten them out if you want to. Let's see what happens if I do that. So I'm going to go to the UV mode, something like that, especially the section that I feel like it's stretching a lot, and I'm going to use my scale tool to kind of pull this out. So I have to be very careful not to overdo things, and so I'm jumping to my scale tool, and then I'm using the scale handles to kind of, let's call it decompress, if you will, so that the UVs look nice and neat and get that looking the way we want. There's many different ways of doing the same technique, but this is a pretty good looking method or working method, and so we'll use a very simple way to fix the problem. No need to add overcomplicated techniques to this. Excellent. I'm happy with the result of this guy. Can jump on to the next one. In fact, I'm going to turn off the texture display for this, or the preview texture, and then I'm going to assign that Lambert shader that we have created previously. There we go. Let's grab this guy. I'm going to run through the same process, isolate that, look from the top angle, and then we're going to do UV camera based loop, select that, loop, select that, and one loop running all the way through the center. Shift right click, cut, UV space, select all the UV components, shift right click, unfold, shift right click, layout. There we go. Happy so far. Let's preview that texture. Looking good, looking good. No weird warping or distortion, so I am happy with that. Disable that option again for the texture preview, and then assign my actual shader to my model. Right click, assign Lambert 3. Excellent. Okay, so I'm not going to run through this doing it to all the cylindrical objects. Using this technique, you can go and do that for yourself, for your objects, and that's exactly the same technique I would use on these pegs, same I would use on these pots, on these ropes I would use the same technique. Maybe there might be a different technique to that, but I'll show you guys how I would approach that. In fact, let's do that. Let's look at a complex object like this one, for instance. This is a spiral or a helix, and usually these are quite complex or difficult objects to try and UV map. So I'm going to show you guys my way of doing it. First of all, let's isolate that. We're going to get rid of the faces that we actually don't need. As long as they're hidden inside of other piece of geometry, then we should be good. And in fact, let's look at this guy and see. Yeah, we definitely can see that there's a lot of stretching and warping happening. So we have to make sure we have good-looking UVs. So that seems to give us what we want, but there's still a weird compression or distortion happening. So let's see how we can fix this. This might be a bit of a long-winded technique, but it works very well. So if you follow the steps, then you should get a pretty good looking result. So first of all, we're going to grab the UVs for this object. We're going to go ahead and then unitize everything. So what that does, it takes every face of this object and makes them equally sized and fit them perfectly to the UV space of our grid from 0 to 1 and then 0 to 1. So let's quickly do that. Let's have a look. If I click that, let's have a look. It could be normalized. No, it's not normalized that I'm looking for. It's unitized. There we go. Now we can see that it stacked it into that 0 to 1 space, so each cube is perfectly evenly spaced out. Except for this is so dense that, and it's all sharing the same face, so whatever texture I applied to the U1V1, this is repeating itself all the way around to the bottom. In some cases this might be useful, but for our case we don't want that. So the next thing that I want to do is I actually want to loop select these guys, and then I'm going to go ahead, right click, and I'm going to go to UV edge ring, and then I'm going to say move and sew. What this will do is take every edge of the ring and sew them together, so it's creating this long stacked shell on top of each other. And then what I'm going to do is repeat the same process for the sides. So I'm going to loop that all the way down, move and so, move and so, move and so. And then lastly, we have one UV border that should be there, and this is perfectly laid out with each of them being well spaced out. I am then going to go ahead to the UV shell, and then I'm going to say layout to pack them into that UV 0 to 1 space, and we have a very good looking UV layout. There's a bit of distortion, skewing happening, but for the most part this is such a tiny little asset, I would hardly ever pick up any distortion, especially being viewed from this distance. Excellent. For the rope, it kind of makes use of the same technique, so I'm not going to bother showing you guys that again. This will work for all of these bits that we have here. So I'm going to quickly do those and then come back to you guys just now.